The only person that talks about war, the only people that talk about war right now in Asia or the Middle East or Europe are Americans and Israelis. That's it. No one else is interested. So they are going to do whatever they can to avoid conflict, which means if they can mollify him, sort of pacify him in some way, they will. They're not going to surrender, and they're certainly not going to give up their goals. But they've had experience with him before where he said outrageous things, and it went nowhere. Mm-hmm. In other words, right now, I don't think anyone believes anything we say. Presidents need at least 4 areas of competence. 1, national security. In other words, the military. You need to understand the Defense Department and the military, how it works, so forth. You need to have some grounding in foreign policy. You need to understand the international actors and interests. Then you have to have some understanding of the financial system, not just here at home, but globally and how it works. Then finally, you need to know enough about politics to get yourself elected. He said, so what do all the presidents come to office with? They figured out how to get themselves elected. The rest of it isn't very important because Americans don't understand it. They don't really question it. And he said, so you've had one president, and he told me this back in the 90s. Today, I guess we can go on and say 70 years. One president, maybe Nixon is the only other exception, who had all those categories checked in some way. And he said, in fact, Eisenhower was the one who had never been in politics and didn't know how to get elected. He said it didn't matter. He was a national hero. They put him up. Everybody said, I like Ike, and went out and voted for him. But he understood the rest: international relations, defense, and finance. Mm-hmm. So here you have a president that he's figured out how to get elected, for better or worse, but he doesn't know anything about the rest of it at all. But he'll tell you that he knows everything about everything all the time. Now you're talking about international relations, international finance, military power. These are things about which he knows nothing. And he's not alone, Kim. I mean, most people in Washington don't know much more than he does. I mean, this may be frightening to most Americans, but they need to understand they don't know what the hell they're doing. They never have. We have no national strategy. We pick countries and transform them into what we insist are enemies so that we can justify this enormous defense budget and can bomb and attack at will when we decide to do so, if it suits us. So if you're looking for a rationale, a coherent strategic rationale for anything, it doesn't exist. President Putin, like President Xi, came up through a very, very challenging and difficult system where only the most intelligent and ruthless survive. So in both men, in Putin and in Xi, you are dealing with highly intelligent, well-educated, very thoughtful people who are acutely sensitive to anything that could disrupt or destabilize their societies, their countries. You know, every morning Xi wakes up and says, how do I hold 1.4 billion people together? People don't even understand what that means. There are several versions of the United States inside China, as Michael Faber likes to say. So I think Putin looks at this man and has probably decided not to take him seriously at all. Mm-hmm. And he's going to pursue his goals. Now, why haven't we already had a war? Because there's plenty of provocation that would have justified Russian military action against us. For that matter, Chinese military action against us, because neither of those men want a war. The only person that talks about war, the only people that talk about war right now in Asia or the Middle East or Europe are Americans and Israelis. That's it. No one else is interested. So they are going to do whatever they can to avoid conflict, which means if they can mollify him, sort of pacify him in some way, they will. They're not going to surrender, and they're certainly not going to give up their goals. But they've had experience with him before where he said outrageous things, and it went nowhere. Mm-hmm. In other words, right now, I don't think anyone believes anything we say, period. He behaves like a toddler or somebody that worked with him. He's got rocket toys and missile toys and so forth, and he's launching them. Mm-hmm. Who do you think you are? Well, that's the key question. Who do you think you are? He thinks we are the great superpower. Look at the tariff war. I mean, this is just insane. And he's threatening the Russians to go to 100%. Russians say, fine, thanks. You think the whole world is going to go along with this? Of course not. That's this thing called BRICS. Donald Trump didn't create it, but he's injecting steroids into it, and it's growing rapidly as a result. Pretty soon it's not going to matter what we say or do. And if we are stupid enough to challenge these people militarily, we'll lose. Now, why would we lose, Kim? Because we are preeminently a maritime and an aerospace power. You're talking about two great continental powers. In fact, you can say three: Russia, China, and Iran. In November, December 2020, and in January of 2021. He'd lost this election. He was furious about it. He recognized that he had missed his opportunity to do some really important things. You know, he had wanted to get out of Afghanistan since 2017. But every time he was confronted with a group of generals and politicians in Washington, he said, "Oh, no, you can't do that. That would be terrible. If you did that, the world would end." And finally, you know, he succumbed to that over and over and over again. So when I was asked to go over and find a way to get us out, I came back and I said, look, you've got to have an executive order from the president. I've already talked to people. We can get out. That's not the issue. Take us about 2 months if we really want to do this. By the way, the winter's the best time to leave because there's a fighting season, and all the people that would normally fight with you or interrupt you and try to halt your orderly withdrawal, they're not around. So if you're going to get out in the winter. So that's great. So an executive order went out. He signed it. We were supposed to be out of there by, I think, mid-January or at the end of January. Ultimately, it all fell apart because Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and you name it, everybody on the Senate side and people in the House, as well as General Milley and all the great luminaries in uniform. "Oh, no, you can't do that. No. So finally he backs down. He says, well, if I can't take us all out, what can I take? And he said, well, you can take 50% of them out. And he settled for that. Now, why did he do that? Because he doesn't understand anything about international relations or military power. Nothing. And he saw all of these forces arrayed against him. He said, okay, I guess I can't do it. So this is not, let us say, Andrew Jackson. Andrew Jackson used to say, one man with courage makes a majority. Okay. This is not Andrew Jackson. This is not James Madison. This is not Samuel or John Adams, somebody who's well-educated, understands the world. It's not there. And he likes to be the tough guy. And he insists that whatever happens has to be because of him, that he's the winner, he's the center. There's no sense at all that there are greater forces than him working and that you have to maneuver through and with these forces. So if you can't give him a win, he's not going to do it. And he's got to get a win. So we're going to punish those Russians and bring them to the table because stupid people in Washington, I mean stupid, still take the position that Russia is weak. China is weak. We can bully them just as we bullied everyone else from Vietnam to Iraq. Nobody ever bothers to point out we lost in Vietnam. You know, we were made fools of in Iraq and Afghanistan. Now, nobody wants to mention that. So he's got this, what I call superpower goggles on. He thinks that we're unchanged in fundamental terms militarily from what we were in 1991. And those forces, they don't even exist anymore. And the composition of the forces is radically different. And the people in charge are radically different. So I think it's sort of a delusion. And he's surrounded by people, these Israeli influencers that are inside the White House and others who have an incentive to stoke this fire. Oh, sure, you know, you got to do this. You got to be tough and got to stand tall. And, you know, we're all with you and everybody loves you and you just do this and you'll be a success. That's not very helpful over time. He's surrounded by what I call financial capitalists. These are not production capitalists. In other words, Henry Ford, J.D. Rockefeller, Elon Musk have built things. They built things, products, capabilities that drove society in a particular direction. He's surrounded by people from New York City who have figured out how to become wealthy thanks to financial fees, transaction fees. They're not building anything. There's no value in any of it. This is the problem with our economy. Everything is being financialized. Nobody's building anything. So he doesn't understand that. He didn't come up through any of that. He inherited most of what he's got. Now, if you start with 50 million, even if you screw it up badly from time to time, you can still make it into a hell of a lot more just by virtue of the fact that you've got 50 million. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that this is not a highly driven production capitalist. He's more in line with the financial capitalists that surround him. That's first thing. Second thing is you have to have absolute confidence in yourself in key areas. And that's what I was trying to mention at the beginning. You know, Eisenhower, for instance, the generals and the admirals came in and said, well, we need to be able to send 25 divisions of U.S. Army troops. This is the old World War II structure. 25 divisions would probably be 400,000 men to Europe to face the Soviets. And Eisenhower sort of sat there and said, really? He said, how many ships and aircraft do we have, and how many men can we move? Well, they didn't have an answer. They came back the next day and said, sir, well, we have enough ships and aircraft that we could move 15 divisions. He said, that's your new requirement. Now get out. All right. You've got to know what you're doing to make a statement like that. And the Joint Chiefs would have lunch with Eisenhower once a month. They hated it because he asked the hard questions. Don't hand me that crap. I know what you do. I know what you need and what you don't need. So don't do that. But of course, Eisenhower was dealing with two things. He was struggling with a big debt overhang from the Second World War, which, by the way, he almost completely eliminated in two terms. And he was cutting unnecessary spending. What are we doing? We just got the big, beautiful bill.